All right, we are recording, and this is going to be half rant, half ramble. Definitely no script. Sorry about that. But it's also meant a little bit of a joke video and an informative video. I know I'm combining so many things in here. So as it says up there, Dying Light 2 frame time statistics and graphs. So every now and then, when I look at some TechTube videos, I will see comments, people saying, "Hey, we want to see frame time graphs. Hey, we want to see it in frame time." So I've been working with frame time graphs for 5, 6 years, and I don't do it in videos. I do it in writing, in written articles. And the purpose of this video, for those leaving those comments, is to show why you do not want that. You will not watch those videos. In fact, you're not even going to watch this video. You're going to stop. So that's one purpose. The other purpose is to go through these frame time graphs, explaining what they are, what they're showing, both generically and also for this specific data. Hopefully I will remember to achieve all that for each one. But also, there was one graph in particular that I will probably spend too much time talking about because it is a very informative graph and would be the one that it's like, okay, TechTuber, you want to start doing frame time stuff. Let me tell you this. Don't bother with putting the graphs in the video, but make this graph for yourself, look at it, and use that to contextualize your data. That will help you so much. Because I do believe that there are certain stats people are using that are not actually correctly used, or rather, they're overemphasized. Their importance is overemphasized. So first off, though, these are my system specs. So I collected the performance data on these computers. I only have one RX 580, so the RX 580 data was collected on my desktop. If I had a second, then I would, collect it on the test system along with all the others. But yeah, for now, it's only there. I don't think that the performance is going to be too terrifically different, though, from what we'd get if I put the 580 in the test system. But in any case, it is different. Okay, now, yes, I'm going to show you the graphs, but that's the focus. But we're going to start at the tables, because this is just the first graph shows all this data as a graph, though it doesn't. I don't use numbers in the graphs, at least not this graph, because for me it's not necessary. As I said, I do written articles. I have a table like this next to these graphs, so you don't need to look at the graph to get the specific values out. You can look at the table. Okay. But I just want to go through. We've got the mean, median, 0.1%, 1%, 99.9, sorry, 99%, 99.9%. Most TechTubers, though, well, it's actually this, that you get. Currently it's in FPS, but I actually do all the work in frame time. And the 99% high frame time is the 1% low for FPS. And this is true for all the graphs as well. I do that all in frame time. So things will be inverted. Like shorter is better, not taller. Okay? But yeah, so I just want to do this and also point something else out. The mean and median are both averages. The definition of the average is the central tendency of a distribution, and one of the graphs is a distribution, so we can look at that, if I remember to really mention it. But whenever you see a TechTuber and it just says average, technically it's either of these. We don't know. They really should specify the mean or the median, depending on which they're using. I do believe, though, that it's typically the mean. But there are times that they can be very different. Those aren't quite there. Here, you look at those. So we've got the ray tracing. The ray tracing data is phenomenal to look at and understand why. Frame time graphs might not always be best. But we've got a difference here of 5 FPS for one and 9 for another. And yes, I know technically we should be looking at that in frame time, but for now, let's just do this. So yeah, but all these values here, this thing is for that, and we're not looking at that. But all these values are in this graph. So this is the summary graph, as I call it, and is the most analogous to those graphs that TechTubers use, where the bar is the mean, and then, well, here we'll just pick this one, so we get a zoomed in version of it. This one. This bar right here, that's the 99% high. These are not normal box plots, they're custom. This is the 99% high. So those are typically the two values you will see shared in a TechTube video. Sometimes you might see a 0.1% low, which is this 99.9% high. But it's we've also got the complement, so the 1% low, and and the 0.1% low for frame time. Remember, doing this all in frame time. But also the median. So you can see how there are some differences, but largely they are very close to each other. Okay, that legitimately is true most of the time. Not all the time. Oh, and in case it needs to be said, the median is the center value for the distribution, for the data. So there is half the data down here and half the data up here, okay? Whereas the mean is the arithmetic mean. It's, you add up all the data and you divide by the count of the data, the amount. All right. And we'll just go back to this one. I just want to add that these graphs, the design does differ between techtubers, and some have a better design than others. But there's nothing wrong with these graphs. They are still informative. They are giving you useful information. But they're not giving you all of the information. So I do understand that desire to be like, hey, we want to see a frame time graph. That they can give you too much information, and going through all of them can also be a pain. Let me give you some background on this, though. So currently we have 9 plots here, okay? 3 locations, 3 APIs. So one of them was the ray tracing, so it's only the 2 GPUs. If you want to think of this as like 9 different games, you can, since most techtubers, to my knowledge, they just do like 1 location. I do 3 in a game, and it's also 5 minutes each. Okay, so each run here is 5 minutes long of data. I don't repeat them. Okay, like a lot of techtubers, they will do like a 1 minute run, but they repeat it 3 times. I do 5 minute data in one location, 5 minutes of data in another location, 5 minutes of data in another location. Okay, just so you understand, because there's a lot of data here, and we're going to see that with especially the next graph, which is probably when you say, hey, we want to see a frame time graph. This is probably what you're thinking. Course graph, I call it. So this is, and we'll just pick one. Yeah, let's do Vegas 64. The Vegas 64 actually performed fairly well. You're probably thinking something like this. Maybe with points. Here it's a step line, so that means that the line is actually moving between points, first going horizontally, then vertically. So it's only horizontal and vertical lines here, no diagonals. It helps to emphasize differences between values. And you can definitely see that, yeah, there was some, that we do have, these spikes here that would be, from potentially stutters. If it's a single frame, I'm not sure if you'd really notice it. But like over here, you might, like that's, a bit grouped together. You'd probably notice that. But some of these you might not. They're just outliers. Which gets me to one issue with this graph, is that when you just look at this, I mean, yes, you can tell the majority of the data is right in there, and you can, if we look here, you can see that, and that's why these points are actually at 10% transparency. Sorry, 10% opacity, 90% transparency. So it helps to tell the density of the data. Okay, so it is mostly dense right along, the cores here. It kind of falls apart really falls apart for the ray tracing. But for the most part, it's right along there, but you do have spots where it goes off. And here we can take a closer look. So this right here is where we had, that one spot that I said you'd probably notice it. It's more than 1 frame. And here, let me try to narrow that down. I could probably narrow it down further. But yeah, so it's kind of tight right there. But it's, it's not very long. That's, I think when I've looked at this before, it was like 2 or 3 seconds. But it's only going, well, okay, no, it's going down to 20 FPS. You'd probably notice that from 60. But for only 2-3 seconds, it's not going to be that bad. You're going to feel it, but it's not like, destroying your experience. Your experience is largely going to be pretty good. And yeah, you can also see here, though, how it does go horizontally and vertically. Yeah, I can actually cut this down, and let's actually put this up. That Yeah, so now you can really see how it's horizontal and vertical. So think about how much time I just spent looking at this one graph, this one plot. Now look at how many graphs there are here. This is part of why I say you don't want to have frame time graphs in TechTube videos, because there's too much to cover. They'd have to go through each one of these, or at least give some consideration for them. And it's also, there are certain patterns. Now, the way I have this arranged is not really the best for spotting those patterns. So I put in control to be able to flip this. So now the GPUs, instead of being up here, are going to be over here. And then these, the location, quality, and API are going to be vertical, are going to be the column. It needs to redraw this, and there's a lot of data there. I actually don't remember. The whole thing is like 220 meg, all the data uncompressed. Compressed, it's 30, I think. Now this isn't all of it though. I have cut it down to just be the high data and the ray tracing. The high data I have for every GPU. The ray tracing is only for those that, could do ray tracing. But let me see. For the 770, I've got the very low. The FSR, the 60 FPS FSR ultra quality was the GTX 980. Many had 60 FPS. Well, that's just I try to dial in some settings in order to get better performance. And with the 980, I said, let's see what FSR ultra quality does, and it actually did a good job. Medium, I did that for the RTX 2060 because I hadn't quite nailed down the 60 FPS mark, which is not too far away from it, at least not visually. So it actually would have been a little bit better. The stats would have been a little bit better. And yes, this is taking a while to run. I'm kind of tempted to just pause the recording. Of course, probably the moment I do that is when it will actually finish. So let's do that to speed it along. Oh, right there. I was about to hit the button. Didn't even do it. Okay. So that stutter, well, we don't see it down there anymore. But right here, this one right here, you can see that's actually across a lot of these. One exception is actually the 980. For whatever reason, it didn't do it. But only with DirectX 11. All the other GPUs, except the 770, because that day is just off the charts, literally. Except for that, and it would take as long to redraw. By the way, all this, if I did change the upper limit, so I'm not going to do that. But you can see it's actually present along all of them. So there's actually a good chance that what is going on there is it is something about the location, the path I was running, that would just have that happen. And I'm just looking, is there anything, are there any other patterns that would really be worth talking about? None are really coming to mind. But see, that's something that a tech tuber, if they're going through this data, going through these graphs, should talk about. It is also worth noting, though, that that's something that's more interesting to me, because I do a performance analysis of a game, multiple GPUs, whereas a reviewer, hardware reviewer, would do so more multiple games, one GPU per se. They might be using old data for the other GPUs, but I mean it's the emphasis is on the GPU's performance, whereas here it's more, well, their emphasis is more how does a graphics card perform in a game. My direction for it is the reverse. How is the game performing on a graphics card? So it's like, for me, this is actually somewhat interesting to see, but I could see the other way, how I had it before, where you're just comparing, going across the GPUs. That's more what a hardware reviewer may want to do. Uh, but yeah, I mean, how much time would it take to go through all of this stuff to really note things like how the Vega 64 and RX 580 actually, had quite a few outliers there and there, here as well. But you see that, for other GPUs. And also just talking about how, ray tracing really sucked. It pulled down the performance of the 2080 and the 2060. But old Villador wasn't terrible. It was terrible on the others. All right, so next we have frequency graph, which this is basically just the distribution of the data. So Yeah, let's go with this one. Yes, it looks bad because there's that much data, but I just wanted to point out the lines here. So this one, this green one, is the mean, and this one is the median. So it's a dark cyan and dotted line right here. That's the median. So half the data is on this side, half the data is on that side, and I can prove that, adding that feature, and you can see there's about 50.15% in here. And this is going from 30 milliseconds to 0 milliseconds. There isn't negative, but the graph is expanded, so there's a little bit of slack there. So there's 49.85% of the data above here. So there's 49.85% over here, and the difference then is the 50.15. But yeah, I just wanted to show though that both of those can be considered averages, because they are the median. It doesn't care about all this noise here. The mean does. The mean is getting dragged to the right because of all that. The median, it's irrelevant. All that could be in a spot that wide, and the median would still be exactly where it is. There are reasons to use the median. There are reasons to use the mean. It's all contextual. I like including both. All right, now let's look at a graph that'll look a bit better. Let's use that. All right, so you'd want to look at this, and you'd see all these little dots there, the noise there. That's what this stuff is. Okay, and actually, hang on, which one is it? Okay, Old Villador. So that's, was it DirectX? It is DirectX 12. So that's this way. So all these spikes there, that's what we're seeing in here. And that's 0.24% of the data. So a quarter of a percent of the data in here. Let's, there. Now it's an actual quarter of a percent of the data. Okay? This is interesting. This is useful information to have. But, and in fact, it is part of the information that you're given by many techtubers. But it's like, do you actually want to have a techtuber go through and talk about how, oh yes, we have this JP, and we can see how, there's really very little data over here. And oh, isn't this interesting? You see this little bump there? It kind of looks like for some of the location and some of the path that I ran, we did have stable performance in this area, but truly most of the data is really right here. Already, just that range is 90.73% of the data. Is that really what you want in a tech tube video? I don't think so. I don't think you want somebody going through that, unless they can do it with a good British accent and you think you're watching the BBC. All right. And also, it's not just this one GPU or this one API even for the GPU. It's like, that's DirectX 12. Okay, well, here's DirectX 11. Well, now we don't see, quite the same bump there. It kind of is there, but that actually could just be random noise. And looking over here, though, it does seem like there's a little bit less of the noise over here. It's more concentrated on the actual bell of the curve. Is that really what you want? I don't think it is. Something else, though, that can be talked about is here is look at the width of this. Now compare that to, let's go 1080. 1080 is wider. Now part of that is because the performance is a little bit lower. Actually, it's not truly a little bit. It is somewhat significant because it went from here to there. Yeah, the VX 64 actually really liked Dying Light 2. It actually prefers it with DirectX 11 to 12. The 1080, I think, it actually is also preferring it 11 to 12. But it's just, the VX 64 and GTX 1080 are similar performance, the same performance. But, yeah, we're still looking at the 1080. But yeah, you can see how this was suddenly wider. It's like, that is something worth considering. But is it too wide? Because it actually might not be. This might just be because, well, the data just, as you get to longer frame times, the data can itself stretch out, which you see here somewhat, which starts stretching out more. It's actually the better example would be the 770, where the distribution over there is just getting really, really wide. I'm not sure if there's a transformation I could do that would account for that. But if you look at the 2080 here, how this is a very narrow distribution, which is very good. That is, you want to see that. That means that it was very focused, and we can infer stability We can't be certain. This graph doesn't tell us that, but it does infer. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else to really add there. Nothing's really coming to mind, but yeah, as this moves down, you can see it become wider. And part of that is also at shorter frame times, because I record a fixed time at just 300 seconds. A shorter frame time, so higher performance, means that there's more data, so this can actually get taller. That's something we're also seeing here. So you can see this pushes up to the top label here is 300, and that's the 2080 Old Villador and DirectX 11. Well, if we look at the 2060, the top label here is 150. Yes, it goes above that, but we're still about half the height. That is also something that goes on here, where at higher performance, the distribution, there's more data filling it out. So you might see that suddenly become taller and a bit narrower if it was able to keep some sort of stability. So yeah, there's various things that can impact these graphs, but is still a very useful graph to look at because there are certain things it can't tell us. All right, and by the way, I don't think I mentioned before, hopefully you figured it out though, the red lines that we see on many of these graphs, they're just to mark where 60 FPS is, or 16.666, so on, milliseconds, okay? That's, I know a lot of people go to 120 hertz or 144 hertz, whatever, it's like, to me, I think 60 is still the best one to actually have as the clear reference point. Also, I use a 60 hertz display, so it's like, it's what I'm using. All right. This graph is, I mentioned at the beginning of this, that if a tech tuber were to look at this and be like, okay, Jim, what is it that I should do to make my content better? You don't need to include this graph, but you should, if you can, in your process, generate this graph so you can look at it and inform yourself on what it is you're talking about. Do it. This graph is so important, so valuable. And the funny thing is, it's the same graph as we were just looking at. It's still a distribution of the data. It's just drawn a bit different. All right. Let's go with that one. Okay. It just took a little bit to draw it. Okay. Yeah, and also I just want to say I made improvements to this graph. Previously, this version didn't have the rectangles or the slope value there. It did have the green line. But I'm just using this to explain what exactly this graph is. So as it says here, QQ distribution. Technically, it's only a Q distribution. But the purpose of the graph is you take the data and you order it from least to greatest. And hang on, also occurred to me I should really check. Am I in fact capturing the cursor? Yes, I am. Okay, good. That would be embarrassing. But we're going from least to greatest. And it has, on the y-axis here, plotting out what the specific value is. The x-axis, it says, is percentile. In actuality, and this is why it's called a Q graph or QQ graph, it's the quantile. That is the measure of the number of standard deviations away from the median, which is why I have the median drawn here. That is the center of the graph, okay? So quantiles, though, can be translated to percentiles very easily. There was some weirdness with the graph because technically this actually goes out to negative infinity and positive infinity. And some of how I do things, like for cropping down to look at specific things, doesn't like considering positive and negative infinity. Anyway, so it's sorted that way. And something else very important about this is a nonlinear x scale, which you can kind of see here. Here's 0.1%, here's 1%. So there's 0.9% of the data is between this line and this line. From here to here, though, is 49%, 1 to 50%. 49% of the data is here, 0.9% of the data is here. That is clearly not linear. But that's fine. That is absolutely fine, because you look at this, and even actually from a little bit past the 0.1% to about here, that data is almost straight. Not quite, but it's nearly a straight line. That's actually very common. That is a lot of what I see when I look at these graphs is like that. Yes, we do have the turn towards outliers, I call it. There might be a more correct statistics term. Sorry, yes, I have a bachelor's of science in mathematics. I never took a stats course. So forgive me. I actually only know about this graph because it's this graph type because of the software I use for making it has this as an option. And it's like, oh, let me see how that looks. And what does this do? It's like, oh, this is actually very informative. But yeah, so we've got the turn towards the outliers there. And I know I want to come back and keep talking about the specific graph here. I want to quickly explain, though, why it is a QQ plot, QQ graph, but technically what I'm doing is more like a Q graph. So this x-axis is quantiles. In a QQ graph, so is the y-axis. What you would actually do is you'd have this data here, your measured data, your sample, but you'd have on the other axis, a y-axis, plotting out the a different distribution. So like the normal distribution. And the idea then is to compare the two to see if your data is normally distributed or if it's some other distribution. I'm still kind of doing that here with this theoretical line, this green line, but that's not entirely true. That line is just connecting the 1% low to 99% high. But we can move it. I'm not going to because it would need to redraw the entire graph, but I could. I could just change that value there. And also the slope is the slope of the line. And this has a slope of 0.1. That would be milliseconds per percentage, per 1%. So that would mean that with 100%, on average, you would have a range of 10 milliseconds. That is not actually true here because, we're going from 6 to 65, so a difference of about 60 milliseconds. That's big. But it's on average because, the bulk of the data is, along or near the line. Here we've got a little bit over the line. Here we have a little bit under the line. But by and large, it levels. It balances out. But here we've got these outliers. And this gets to why it is so important, I feel, and I'm just looking, where's a good example? Yeah, let's go with this one. This is why, to inform a reviewer, TechTuber, I feel that making these graphs for themselves, at least, would improve the quality of their product. So, as I said before with the earlier graph, a lot of TechTubers, they just use the mean and then a 1% low value, which, remember, is the top edge of the box, not the line, the top edge of the box. Sorry, tail. This is called a tail. The thing is, though, I do believe a lot of them do it blindly, where it's just, yeah, that's just the value I use. That's not ideal. So here's something that's very true. Even for statisticians, like professional statisticians, which I truly doubt there's any of them making these tech tube videos. Maybe there are, but it's arbitrary. The 1% low value, that's just, if a statistician is using that, it's because that's what they wanted to use. You can use 3%, you can use 5%. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you can justify it, that's good. And that's kind of what I'm getting to here, is the ability to justify the 1% low. That is what this graph allows you to do. But by and large, I think it's just people pick that, and that's what they run with. And so they emphasize it. They think that it's more important than it is. It's only telling you about 1% of the data, though. And that's it. It doesn't tell you about anything else. It is literally, what is this point on this distribution? And that's it. 99% of the data is better than it, is at lower frame times, better performance, and 1% is below that. But the problem is, imagine if it were instead the 0.1% low, because remember, 0.1% low frame rate is 99.9% high frame time. You look at this difference here, it would be completely inappropriate to use, because we are clearly into outlier territory. Now, Dying Light 2, for all the data I have here, except for something like the ray tracing, except for that and the 770, except for that, you can use the 1% low. It's actually a good value. It is in the bulk of the data. But another game I actually was working with just the other day. No, the 1% low for frame time would actually be in outliers already. So it would be inappropriate to use the 1% low there to be representative of the game, because it's not. It's an outlier. That's another thing, by the way. Outliers, we get to just decide, oh, well, that's an outlier, that isn't. Now, I can use this graph as defense and say that, okay, definitely like this point on. Um, let me see, let's do that. 99.2. Okay, let's actually see if I can get to like the edge of that curve. Okay, we're starting to have the curve there. I'm gonna go then a little bit higher, just so that we can actually see it there. Okay, this right here though, this edge, well, sorry, this curve at the edge there, anything past that, like where I have the cursor right now, I would consider that is either an outlier or trending towards the outliers. So I don't want to use that data. I would not consider that representative of the performance for this configuration. I would not. I would reject that. Well, not fully reject it, but set that aside and be like, okay, I'm going to use values to the left of this. Which fortunately, it's like we know when I was looking at this, that's better than 99% of the data. We don't have crazy outliers at the low end. It's like these still are on the line. We do have some here. See on the RX 580 here how there is that turn down. That I would not want to include. That's outliers. I'd want to avoid those as well. But here, this is actually very consistent. So we've got 99.39%. It's a rounding error there. But 99.4% of the data is shown here. It has a range of just about 9 milliseconds. That's not necessarily great, but that's actually still pretty good. And let me see, this is for the 2060. The slope of that line is 0.06. Now that's going from 1% to 99%. This, if I actually, here, let's pull this in a little bit further. There. Now we're down to 9 milliseconds instead of 10. Which tells you just how, well, about 10. Tells you how just all it changed was 0.1% of the data is now no longer being shown. 0.1% and change that much. And if I cut this down even further, it would stand out even more. That is why I think this graph is so important and can inform you when you're talking about this stuff. Because it might be, 1% low, I shouldn't be using that. That's a bad value to use there because it has that turn towards the outliers, or it already is an outlier. So maybe then you want to go to like the 2%. Or even just 1.1%. It could be that small a difference. It could be just that far that you want to use 1.1% instead of 1%. But as I said, I don't believe many tech tubers, I could believe many of them don't even know such a graph like this exists. And actually, should have picked the other API. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't think that they even know that they could look at the data in this way and be like, hey, 1% low isn't good to use here. I should use this value instead. And now that I have this tool, I'm actually going to be doing that more so because I can just load up my data in there, and then when I write up whatever I'm writing, whether that's a performance analysis, which is what this is from, or a review, where it's like a single configuration then, hardware and software configuration I collect data on. Say I can go through this and I can find those values and I can better understand them and explain them because I can dial it in here. I can also do here. I'm actually gonna okay, no, I'll use this graph, but I can also do this now. So it's like I'm zooming in already and I can actually pull this up a bit more. Actually, I probably don't even need to go to 0.6 might be enough. 0.65 to really like cut off. Yeah. So now we do have some of the turn here, but it's like focusing in on this, that would work great. This would be, very useful for me to be able to see how this actually behaves in there. Because this is the bulk of the data. We're literally looking at 98.5% of the data here. That is what you're going to expect. This is representative. If I do this, it's like this is all the data, but it's necessarily representative of your experience. Well, if I do that, so that's a little bit here. Let's actually make that 1% of the data. Now this is on the high side, so this is very good. But look at this. That's not representative of the data. That's only 1% of it. I don't care what that is. That's not enough of the data to make me care. And if it were on the other side, oh, yeah. 50. Oh, actually, doesn't. I need to go still higher. That's what I'm normally using. I spend way too much time, by the way, making this applet that I can do all this crazy stuff in it. But this is 1% of the data. And this left edge, that's 99%. So that's a 1% low. So this is the data we're actually learning about. So we are learning that there is 1% of the data that is below 38.05 milliseconds. But I mean, look, the range here is 21 milliseconds. So from this point to that point, there's 21 milliseconds. And the funny thing is, it's actually even worse. The range should actually be worse than this. Let's really exaggerate. Okay, so, oh, okay, no. It was here to here was the range we were seeing. Now we're actually including like the rest of the data. So that last 1% has a range of 46 milliseconds. That's terrible. But it's 1% of the data. We don't care. This is 98% of the data. This we care. And that's why I will include them on this graph. That's from here to here. Well, not this specific graph, but actually, yeah, let me see. This is 580, 11 center Villador, center Villador, and it was, so that's from here to here. We're looking. But yeah, I mean, this is valuable for that reason, and this is actually looking pretty good because it is pretty flat. It stays close to that line. It would be nice if the slope were lower. The flatter this is, the better. What the slope being closer to 0 is better than not. Um, but it's still it being so consistent that suggests a great stability to the data. We don't know for certain. It's kind of like in here. Let's that one where this isn't very narrow, but it's like the narrower it is, we can infer stability. We don't actually know for certain. This graph can't tell us that. This one can't tell us that. But I do also want to point out though that this is that body here. Okay, and here let's see if we can actually like dial this in. Okay, so this is roughly that line that we see on the QQ plot. This is 98% of the data, and I have it roughly centered. Okay, that's what this is. The slope of the line here would be directly related to the width of this distribution. Okay, just to help explain how the QQ plot that I use works. The narrower this is, the less that slope is, and therefore also the less that slope is, the narrower this is. So we do want that. But this is still not terrible. It isn't. All right. Now, as I was saying, this graph, frequency graph, cannot actually tell you specifically about stability. You can infer it, and it's a usually pretty good inference. But it is still technically possible that you could go from, this point to this point, back and forth, and that would be bad. Okay, and it could be even worse if we included all the data up here. Okay, so if you're going from here to here, that would be bad. Now it is true. There is, yeah. Actually, let me do this. I'm just gonna use this one because it's near here. Okay. I want to just show how nonlinear this is, so I do that. This is 3.5% of the data that we're looking at here. It is now 0.2%. It is now 31.33%. It's very nonlinear. And like this, I haven't changed the width of this, but you see what it includes changes. That's fine though. For this graph, it works fine. But I just wanted to explain why you don't actually have to worry too much about a point here going here, because it's not going to do that a lot. You run out of data on the right side. But this next graph, this is actually meant to show stutter. So I define stutter as a sudden change in the frame time from one graph to one frame to the next. Okay. So that is, this would be a stutter by my definition. Actually, it'd be two stutters because one to go up there and then one to come back down. Okay. Actually, I'm just trying to see here. So this would be one frame there. That's frame. So yeah, there's actually like three involved. Okay, so I define it as sudden change. So these here wouldn't be stutters, but this, whoa, that's a big change, and then comes right back. So that's what this graph is meant to show us. And I've been using basis 4 a lot. Let's go back to that. So this is, just so that we can get a closer look at it, the x-axis is the frame time measurement. So the measurement of that frame, what is the length of time there? The y-axis is the consecutive difference, specifically from one frame n to n plus 1. So that means that the x and y coordinate for any of these points, if you add those two together, that's the x coordinate of the next one. So the reason why for these two graphs you can only infer stability is because the time element is removed here. We have no knowledge at all if this point was after a point here, a point here, point here. We don't know. That is removed. That is just how those graphs work. This graph keeps that. Now, we don't necessarily, technically you could try to draw together all the points. It would be a mess. But it's here we still get that information, though, of, okay, we know for this one that, like, the next value was a long one. The next frame time was a long one. So there was actually probably a stutter with the data up here. Down here, though, we probably wouldn't have noticed it. It's like, yes, there's a change there, but it's so small we likely wouldn't tell. Now, as you can see, I have a heat map here. And here we've got, the full scale. It's missing here because the scales are actually common across all of these plots. So that means then that, like here, how we've got the yellow, that's the hottest of the heat map. The heat map is actually telling us density. So the density was great enough here to reach yellow. But the blue and green, the density wasn't achieved. At the size we're looking at these, that density wasn't achieved, so we only see the yellow. That's what's happening there. But if I, look at this one, we get the heat map, because now it's just this data that we're looking at. All right, back to this. And this is also, I'm saying, going through these plots, it actually would be worth, in a techtube video, to go through every single one of these plots. To talk about, okay, how many outliers are we looking at here? About where does that start? That actually is informative. That can tell you some important stuff concerning stability. But it is also, as I was saying, you really only care about where it's flat. How wide is that? If it's very wide, that's very good. But you get something like this, and yeah, you're only looking from like here to here. That's that actually might be around 75. Nope, we can actually go a little bit higher. It's not linear, which makes it a little hard to just pick spots. Could that be at 90? Yeah, okay. See, now I want to try to find this. Okay. So let's try 93 and hope that's it. Okay, 91. Okay, we want to know about this. It's like the rest of it we don't, is small enough. I a little bit lost my train of thought there, I will admit, when looking. But, and now I need to come back to this, and as I said, I lost my train of thought. It isn't scripted. I warned about this at the beginning. This is a rant or ramble. Anyway. So yeah, we've got the heat map here that's telling us where the greatest density is, and the reason we need that is, okay. Oh, that's right, that one just applies it immediately. The opacity, you actually need to hit the button to apply. So as you can see here, these points are actually mostly transparent. It's 10% opacity. So once you get into here, though, it's so dark there that you can't actually tell anything. You don't know, is this the densest point? Is this? Is this? That's what the heat map does. And the more the data is close to 0, the better. And also, obviously, to the left, because that means lower frame times, higher performance. But as you can see, a lot of it misses. Not, well, it looks like a lot. It actually isn't. So this is one feature that I've added. So in here is only about 4% of the data. Okay. Down here, about 4%. So if we try to just dial in on the heat map itself, there's 90% of the data in here. That's actually pretty good. And we're going plus or minus about 2.5 milliseconds. So frame n to n plus 1 is plus or minus 2.5 milliseconds. That's not too bad. You probably wouldn't notice it. Okay? You probably wouldn't. But it's still, the bulk of the data is there. That's 90% of the data is there. You do have some that are out, and I refer to these as wings. This main body here is the blob. I don't know if this graph has ever been used by anyone else. I may have invented it. I don't know. It was more of a just how do you plot stutter kind of question. And I stopped and thought about it. And it's like, well, that's my definition of stutter. So I need to capture that. I don't want it as a coarse graph because then we're not, it's like I only care about the difference from one frame to the next. I don't actually care about the order of the frames. So this is what I came up with. So it's like, this is, it's not very good. Oh yeah, that's right. That's why I was talking. That's why I was talking about that. It's like I come up with the terms for these. So this is the blob, the heat map. So the blob is fairly often a little bit larger than the heat map. These are wings, though it's not very clear. This one is, you can see kind of the wing shape. It's a lot easier to see like here. Now, if we actually look at this one, we see the wings have not that much data in them. But this is a wing, and this is a wing. And the blob is in here. And this is certainly one where, yeah, where having the heat map is helpful. Because, that's just all solid black. But if we look more closely and you see there's actually two main peaks. This is actually pretty common. So, and to explain that, I'm going to actually explain the wings. What's happening here is like this frame is very long. Well, the next frame is going to be very long because it has a high consecutive difference. So that is actually going to point down here. Now this frame, it's only about 20. I don't know. Let's just say 20 milliseconds. But it's up here near 20, so it's going to go to 40. That's over here. But now here, so we know it's going to be along this vertical line or so. But then it has a large negative value. Not negative 20, but more like negative 15. So that's going to pull it back here. The wings are actually because a frame had one, the next frame was going to be a long one. So a one frame stutter, and then it goes right back. So it's just ding, 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 drawing out triangles. That's also happening in here. Except it's not so much, from here up and over. It's just back and forth like that. It's bouncing. That's what I refer to it as. It's bouncing across 0. There is nothing significantly wrong with that. Ideally, that won't happen. Ideally, the peak is on 0. It happens though, but it's not a big deal. You're not gonna notice. Okay. I'm just trying to think. Is there anything? I mean, we can look at, as you saw, I can pull out what how much data is in here. So right in there is 98.73% of the data. So this is actually pretty stable, and we have that same plus or minus 2.5 milliseconds. That's pretty stable. You're not really going to run into much stuttering there. But let's let me see. That was paragliding 11 to 2060. So we look at the ray tracing on that. That is terrible. I'm going to turn off the heat map. And as you can see that we don't even have solid black anywhere. That's how terrible it is. The heat map is saying, hey, here's the densest place, but we turn down that opacity and we got to look, and it's like, no. It's like it's the greatest among nothing. I mean, it's like the density is still so low everywhere that it's terrible. And we do this. There's only 20% of the data here in the hottest portion of the heat. Oh yeah, that's right. They're doing that because if it has to redraw the graph, it loses that. So now we're at about 25% when we have that as a guide. So that means that all the rest of this is 75% of the data. What that means is for the ray tracing with the 2060, the performance, the experience was terrible because there's a lot of stutter there. And if we look at the other ones, Sender Villador, it's not better. Old Villador is. Old Villador, for whatever reason, it was fine with ray tracing. Oh, I didn't hit the button. The button is necessary because I wouldn't want to like go here, here, and maybe like also change to not ray tracing. I wouldn't want to do that and have it try to redraw the graph each time. So that's why. But I'll actually leave it at this so that we can come back and look at the 2080, which does perform better. It does. But it's still, I mean, you can just look here and tell that's not what you want. You want something more like this, actually. This. Even the 580 isn't terrible. It's not great. This is not great. Um, yeah, because we still have that same. I mean, we do get some black in there, but this is still very low density. So this is not. This is not ideal. Which is actually kind of disappointing. Well, this is kind of disappointing because that means you're not going to be wanting to run the RX 580 with DirectX 11. It actually prefers DirectX 11 at the high quality. That's fine though. Here, let's actually. So one neat thing with how this works, I don't act because with the update button and just selecting here, it doesn't need to be one of the plots we're able to see up there. So going to my 60 FPS configuration, it is a lot better. But let's go back to high. So it's actually what's shown up there. Although that does also show, it's like, yeah, the RX 580, it's getting old, but you can still, tweak settings and get some pretty good performance out of it. And a lot better than at lower settings. But with the ray tracing stuff though, I even the mighty 2080, this is still not that good. Yeah, we have some black there, but let's see how much data that actually. That's only 62% of the data, so not even quite 2/3. And this is like still larger. I can try to dial in just on the heat map itself. There. I think I'm clipping it a little bit on this side, but I'm also stretched on this side. So yeah, 63% of the data is in the heat map. That means we have 36.5% of the data is all right here. That's not good. That's a lot of stutter. You are going to feel that. And that's what this graph gets to tell us. All right. Now, one thing, though, and that's why this next graph exists. Yeah, we can do that. So the mighty 2080, as I call it, this is actually looking pretty good. Thing is, see this shape? Let's go to 1070. See how far that moved from left to right? Obviously, that's because the 1070 has lower performance than 2080. The thing is, these absolute values, that makes perfect sense, I feel, for when sharing these graphs in an article without commentary like I'm giving now. But it did occur to me that, a change of, say, of that, trying to get this. So I got to -2 there. Okay. So there. So now I've got about, that 2.5 milliseconds up and down here. The thing is, that range over here is going to have a lot more meaning than over here. Because over here, like 2.5 milliseconds when you're at 66 milliseconds, you're not going to notice that. But you will notice it if you're at 8 point. So that's what this graph is. All this is, and pick that one. Actually, was that the one I was even looking at? No. Okay. We're going to try to get these to be similar. Okay, so this is it with the absolute measurements there. Same graph, well, same data, but now this scale is in a relative. So it's a percentage of what the measured frame time is. And literally how I have this is it's just dividing whatever the y value is by the x value and then multiplying by 100. And this is what we get. And as you saw, it did change its shape some. Okay, so this is a lot tighter than this is. And that's in part because at this lower frame time, the differences are going to be felt more. And if we look then at 1070, where now it's longer frame times, the performance is worse. I don't think there's anything about my tabs that are open that are going to be interesting to anyone. Okay, so this is the same data again. But, okay, it does look better with the percentage, but it's still, it's actually very similar. It's just where we are, the percentages and the absolute values kind of align. But yeah, this graph is basically just taking advantage of the nonlinearity of the significance of a stutter. And you can definitely see changes here. I mean, like, look here, how this wing now is, it's not straight, it's actually curved. If we look at it here, they're all straight. Because as it gets longer, the significance at longer frame times, the significance of the stutter is less felt. So yeah, I think I'm done with going through this. I just want to recap. These are the graphs that you would typically see being used in TechTube videos, and they're fine. Some are far better designed than others. But this is typically what you're seeing. That's fine. Don't complain when this is what you're given. Frame time graphs like this, I don't think are that useful unless you are good enough at doing this, which there was one time that I saw somebody at TechTuber do videos using a frame time graph where they actually had the X scale. So here, let's have be the full width. Where the X scale was the frame number. Right? So it wasn't time. It was just, okay, this was at frame 100. What was the frame time? That, it made me laugh and feel sad because, like, this person is being respected for doing graphs like this that I would have gotten a bad grade on in middle school. Because you never use dependent variables on both axes. I mean, not when they're dependent on each other. Because, as I was talking about with some of these other graphs, there is a shorter frame time means that there's more data. So this pattern here that we're seeing, if I did that by frame by frame count instead of time, it would be occurring here, like far over here even, because there would be so much more data. If the 980, it might happen here, but the 1070 would be here, the 1080 here, the 2060 here, and then the 2080 would be over here. But it'd be the same pattern. So yeah, there is bad graph design out there, so you do need to be aware of that. Am I saying that my graphs are better? Yes. That they're the best? No. I know my graphs aren't perfect. I don't see the way to make them better. I would need somebody else to tell me. And maybe I'd do it, maybe I wouldn't. Because sometimes they're telling me information I don't want to change. But coming back to the recap stuff, this I don't think is going to be useful at all. Honestly, I really don't think it is, unless you are doing something like I do, where you're looking at, okay, how did this game perform? And then it's like, okay, well, we have this interesting pattern that's across. There, it's kind of interesting. But it's still such a small percent of the data who actually care. And actually, we can kind of figure out how much data this is. So that is at about the 40 to 50 milliseconds. So, and that's which one is that? The Vega 64. Oops. Centerville or DirectX 12. Okay, so that's this data right here. I wanted to get a closer look there. So now this wouldn't be all of it, because, well, it might be more than that, because there's other data that also appears there. But, we look at this, and it's 0.21% of the data. Yeah, we don't need to worry about that too much. You'll feel it there, but it's not going to be terrible. Frequency plot. I do. This is what's nice about the frequency plot here, the distribution. is that I think you can show this to people and they will understand. They can look at it, they understand that, oh yeah, narrower is better, taller is better. That means that there is more data there. So it's like here we're capping out at 60. Here we're going past 300. We're actually getting up to 350. I think it's this one then. Yeah, here pushing up to 400. It's like, you can see that, you get that, very easily. These are easy graphs to interpret. But do we actually need this in a video? I don't think so. QQ, don't need this in a video, but it is far and away so useful of a graph. You don't need it in a video, but definitely look at it yourself. Because it tells you so much. It really does. It lets you know, hey, is this 1% low actually a valid representative value to use? Maybe it's not. Don't use it then. Find a different. Find something else. And you probably don't need to go too far. Unless it is, ray tracing. Then we got these graphs, which are, I'll be honest, they're weird. I know it. But it can give you a sense of stutter, so you can, and is an empirical way to see stutter. And you can see, going to this one, that's going to be a little bit better as far as whether you'll feel it or not. Ray tracing is terrible. I mean, it's just a stuttery mess. The others are not necessarily always great. The ironic thing is, even though it looks better for DirectX 12 here, the Vegas 64 performed better with DirectX 11. So it actually, I think most of the time, you're better off with DirectX 11 because it gets you better performance that makes up for the stuttering. But even then, it's, you look at this one. And we go to this. In the heat map, and actually the bulk of the data, this is still denser. Oh wait, no. Sorry, I was just praising DirectX 12. So it is actually, yeah, it is denser for DirectX 12. That is more desirable, but the data has now moved to the left enough that the experience might still be better with this. I think it is. That can be up to somebody else, though. That can be up to you. Do you want to play it that way or not? But this graph can help tell you that. Like, okay, how much stuttering can I expect? This graph tells you that. This graph tells you just generally where did the performance fall. This lets you know, okay, what is outlier, what isn't, what is representative, what isn't. This graph, I don't know, tells you how good the person was at running a path over and over again. I apparently was very good that I got this pattern to happen across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 runs that we know of for sure. We don't know about the 770 because it's like in such a bad spot that it's 770 probably, we don't know. But it's like, that it'll tell you about, but we don't know when looking at this. It's like, how significant are these outliers here? Are these stutters? Are they significant or not? You need to look at a graph like this. You need to look at a graph like this. That's when you can find out. So, yeah, these graphs, they look nice. I don't think they're quite as informative as you might think. They do also give you one other piece of information, though. And this is fair. Do we have a good example with this? Yeah, kind of. So in here, how we have this dip, sort of hill, really. It's a dip in performance, and you can kind of see it happening in other places, or maybe it's this one would be better. So this dip down. You see that in the others as well. It's like here, 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 here. So that does tell you that, oh, there was a change in the location that was enough to impact the like actual averages. It's not an outlier. It was just, like we're suddenly outside, so it's rendering better or worse. That this graph does tell you that the others don't. But that's all it's really giving you, and that matters for me because I do 5-minute long runs. If somebody's doing a 1-minute run, there's a good chance they're staying in basically the same kind of environment, so you're not going to see that sudden change. You might. But I could also believe that some reviewers would actively avoid that. And I actually actively avoided as well to a degree. Where, I mean, that isn't the case for this one. But for some games, it might be like, okay, I'll try to collect data that is predominantly like underground if the game features a lot of underground play, or in a building if the game features a lot of that. Collect a, do a run there, do a run where it's outside, and then I'll try to have one that might mix. I don't remember all the locations that I used for The Witcher 3, but one I was careful about to make sure that was outside, that was just in open areas, and another I made sure would go through a town. Okay, so it's like, and that when I suddenly enter the town and then leave it, you would see the difference on this graph. That will not show up here. Well, kind of will. It'll be, like you have one peak here and then another down here. But you don't necessarily know if that is from different locations. You can infer it, but you don't know for certain. You only know for certain from here. The QQ plot, that would actually... One of these kind of showed it. Let's do it. Not quite. But it may, if there were two peaks on the frequency, how that would actually appear here. Well, it kinda. Actually, no, this one. See where I have this turn here, but then it's flat again? If you were to see something like that, but in the bulk of the data, or we do have it here, it's just how you have the change there, like that. I mean, let's imagine that it wasn't too terribly long frame times. That could be from, change in location, where suddenly now we're somewhere that, like, we went from inside to outside, so now the rendering has changed enough for the general performance to change as well. You can infer that. That would appear potentially as like two peaks. Here, which one is longer? Center 2060. Yeah, so we actually do see there's a peak here, but we also have actually two peaks here. So that's actually very possibly what we're seeing here, is those longer peaks. Well, the peaks at the longer frame times. It's like that could be from a location change, but we don't actually know that. We can only infer that from this because that information is removed. Now we look at this one. That's centers. That's over here. Ray tracing right here. And we look at that, and yeah, it actually does look like there was a change in location, because we go, from stable, stable, not stable, not stable, 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 well, not really stable, and then suddenly it's like, no, it just falls off a cliff. We can get that from here. We cannot get that from these. So this still has a value to it. But I do think if you're just talking about the data itself, is this representative of the experience? You want to go with these. Okay, how long have I been going? Because actually is something else I'd like to show you. Only an hour. Okay, well, I'm still going to pause, sort of, just to point something out about this. I've been going for an hour, going through these graphs. Now, yes, I have been vamping some, but even cutting it down to, say, 40 minutes. Okay, just 40 minutes, let's say. Are you going to want to watch a formula? Have you even watched this one that long? Have you watched this video long enough to get to this point? Now imagine having a tech tuber, your favorite tech tuber, try to go through all these graphs, but for multiple games. I mean, I already have the multiple GPUs here, but multiple games. Even if we pretend that every location is its own game, even if we did that, or every location and the APIs as well, maybe not the ray tracing, but even if we, do that. So we've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 6 times 8, 48. Okay? Even if we, well, okay, no, at 48, well, 6. 6 games, 8 GPUs. I was getting ahead of myself a bit there. 6 games, 8 GPUs. That might be what somebody uses in a review. But that's, you have to now go through, you have to go across all of these. That's going to take a long time. hitting 40 minutes, especially because it's like, this is one game, and I know there's certain consistencies I can use in that. You don't have that assumption with other games. They also might want to be changing what the configurations are. Like, this is all at, these are all 1920 by 1080. Yeah, the RX 580, my desktop actually has a 2048 by 1152. It's still 1080p class, though. So effectively, this is all 1920 by 1080. But some of the reviews, they do 1440p, they do 4K, maybe they do ultra wide. They are not going to go through all this stuff. Or if they do, 40-minute long videos, that's what you're going to get. I don't think anyone wants that. Personally, I think a good TechTube video that's going to be like for just a review doesn't need to go into a lot of depth. 12 to 15 minutes. Some I would go up to 20 for a review like that. Only something really technical would I tolerate. That might be, exaggerating there, but would I accept a 30-minute or longer video? Only when it is technical, when it is getting into the details of something, then I will understand, because they're trying to educate me. They're not just giving me information, they're educating. Then I would accept that. Hopefully you felt that if you made it this long in this video. But let me show you something else. I want to show you something, because it is actually really cool, and I want to do it with the frequency, because the frequency graph is actually the fastest to render out, and we'll cut it down. We'll cut this down. Because these 4 GPUs are basically all in the same class. I consider them all to be 1440p class GPU. Okay? And turn that off as well. So we do that. Has to redraw it all. Okay. So, yeah. Just these. And now we also, because it's adjusted the scales, we get a better look at some of them and see that, yeah, the VX64 beat the 3 NVIDIA GPUs here quite handily, which did surprise me. Now, here's where it's something kind of neat you can do. And I don't know if many techtubers know this. Because, a lot of reviewers in general, a lot of them will do like 3 1-minute runs. I talked about this earlier. I don't know how they actually combine that. If they take like the average of those 3, and then so that would be in like the average value here, here, and here. They might take those, well, it'd actually be here, here, and here. But they might take those and then average those 3 values together. You don't need to. And if they do 1% lows in there, I don't know how they choose to do that. But here's the fun thing. And this is true. This is actually completely valid, what I just did there, although that is a bug. It shouldn't be, and I actually know why it's doing that. Hopefully I can fix that. I should be able to. It should not have grouped and just shown all the mean median lines there, so just ignore those for the moment. I made some changes to how these graphs were rendered and forgot about that possibility. But all this did is it's no longer separating out the data by location. So this is, for VX64, this is all of the data at the high quality setting using DirectX 11, all of it together. It's not split out like that. That's actually legitimate to do. It is. It completely is. And then I could just get whatever the mean is for that. And here we can do the same thing here. So we will actually see the specific values. So right there. And actually, just to make this a little cleaner, I'll cut it down to just DirectX 12. I can turn off the groups. That's completely legitimate to do. Because all this data is from the same population. So combining the samples like that, as long as they're independent samples, is completely legitimate. A way to think of it is this. If you wanted to get what the average male height is for an adult, okay, for humanity across the entire world, you're not concerned with specific location, the entire planet, so the whole of living adult males, what is the average height? Okay? You decide, okay, I'm going to take a sample in New York. I'm going to take a sample in San Francisco, in London, in Berlin, in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Mumbai, Cairo. I'm just trying to think of more towns or cities. Brazil City, right? That is a city. I'm not that great at geography. I'm sorry, but you take all that. You can just take all those measurements and throw them together and run the stats on those. You don't need to worry about, okay, well, what is it in New York? What is it in San Francisco? How do we combine those together? No, you can just put it all together because you're just interested in the characteristics of the population. So combining those samples is completely appropriate. This is just representative now of the game instead of the game at the different location. So you can do this. This is completely appropriate. I could turn off. I don't really want to turn off the API, but I could. So if we do that, now this is just how they performed at each quality setting. I could also. I actually do need to keep. Actually, no, I don't. No, I don't. Because it's filtered down like that. I could turn off quality here. So now it's just how did the GPUs perform based on the API, but I could even do this. And now this isn't really valid because the GPUs have, kind of smushed together. But you see, it's like that's just how did the APIs perform. But yeah, because the GPUs are so different that it's not exactly great. But it is technically you can do that. But yeah, they're a bit too different. Probably I misclicked there. Probably if I dropped to 1070. The others were fairly close. Yeah, so the 1070 dropped out that lower. So it's like the 1080 and 2060 are here. The Vega 64 is up here. But you could then see that, oh, DirectX 11, performed this way. DirectX 12 performed that way. You can actually do that. That is legitimate. Here, not so much because the 1070s, their performances are a bit different. At least for this graph, you wouldn't want to do that. But technically, the tables, you could. That. So, like, to just get an idea how the two different APIs performed, that is legitimate to do. That is allowed to do in statistics. So, yeah, this has probably been a boring video. It's probably been something that nobody's made it even 5 minutes into. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But I do think that if anyone did make it through, they found it interesting, and hopefully they've also learned a little bit that frametime graphs, they're nice to think about. They're nice to say, hey, wouldn't that be, a great thing to have? It doesn't matter if it redraws. It shouldn't take two tables. But wouldn't it be great to have more than just this? It's like, yeah, but there you start getting into so much minutia, that so much detail, that I don't think most people want that, especially not in a TechTube video. You want to be able to, a TechTube video, you just play that. It's not just informative, it is also entertainment to a degree. Because if you only wanted the information, you'd go to written articles. You wouldn't look at the TechTube video. You want that entertainment. You want that personality there as well. And to be clear, I am not insulting TechTube videos at all. They're very valuable. It's a great way for a lot of people to learn about this stuff, because it can also take a lot less time, somebody telling you this stuff, than to read through the written article that may accompany it or may not. So, I mean, it is great to have them. I want them to exist. But it is also, you start getting into the frametime stuff, it gets so much more involved that I don't think if you were given what you asked for, if you were asking for frametime graphs, to do it competently, which means not just this, because this is not super useful, and it's redrawing. This doesn't tell you everything. You need to also include a frequency graph. You need to also include the QQ graph. Well, yes, you do, actually, because the frequency doesn't tell you enough about the outliers. Only QQ really does. Take quite a while to draw. Oh wait, no, that's right. QQ plot should be redrawn because of the filtering. Actually, so should the course plot for the filtering. Course plot, though, cannot actually have the facets taken away, which true, they're all enabled, but I have that prevented here. See, now you got this drawn. This doesn't tell you the whole story. This doesn't tell you the whole story, but it's closer. This tells you more as well. So it's like you would have this graph and then these as well that you'd have to go through. I don't think people want that. I don't think people want, because that's now going from 1 to 4 graphs. I don't think you want TechTube videos to be 4 times long. I don't. But, as I said, this graph, if there's a TechTuber that made it this far, or any reviewer, this graph, if your process allows you to draw this, do it and look at it. Because it will inform you so much on what is and is not representative for your statistic. Dying Light 2, great. 1% low is perfectly valid to use. In fact, you could go a little bit beyond it. Not always. I mean, it's like this one, the turn is kind of started there. But it's like you could even go a little bit beyond it and still be safe. Or safe-ish. But there are other games. You cannot do that. There are other hardware configurations. You cannot do that. This graph tells you that. This graph does not. So if you can adapt that into your process for writing your script or writing your article, great, do it. You don't need to share it. You don't need to show that graph. Well, if it's a written article, try to include. But in TechTube video, no, just say, yes, so instead of using the 1% low, we are using, let me come over here. There. Instead of using the 1%, we're using the 2% low. Why'd that turn on the 1%? I don't know. Okay, I'm not sure why I did that. Maybe it was a weird misclick or something somewhere. But it's like, we're using that, and it's the reason why you could say we're using that because when reviewing the data, I found that the 1% low was into outliers for some of the status, so that wouldn't be appropriate to use. So we're using the 2%. That's fine. Write that into your script. I don't think anyone will mind that. Some might be like, hey, can we see this graph? And then, well, share it some other way. It doesn't need to be in the video. But yeah, so this, at minimum, I would recommend use this to inform yourself if you're making the video, if you're writing the article. But otherwise, go ahead and stick with this. There's nothing wrong with it. It gives a lot of the information. Not all of it. Not all of it. None of these graphs give all of it. But you need all of them to understand the frame time data. And I've been working with this stuff for 5-6 years now. Okay? And I'm still finding ways to improve it. It's like, I need to go in and fix up this graph now because it was doing this. I was like, true, that's a more technical thing, but still, it's I now have to do that to make that improvement there. And that matters. That I do need to keep making improvements there, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if you can find ways to improve, good, do it. But at the same time, don't just throw it all in there. Don't put the kitchen sink into the video. I don't think people want. Alright, I am almost certain now I have talked, rather blathered, on long enough. So, yeah. I probably won't do a video like this again. I hope not. The funny thing is, though, I've gone all this time talking about how you don't want to include this stuff. I'm now going to be doing these videos. Yeah, I'm not actually joking on that. It's, more, though, I will be... Oh, wait, no. Those are fine. It's more like just this, though. Like, just collecting it for... Oh, wait. There. For, like, 1 GPU. And actually, just for the reviews. So it might just be that. So it would just be 3 runs. I'm going to be doing that because this applet is great, but it's kind of hard to share at times because the free hosting service I use has limitations. Yeah, that was a fun to run into. I crashed a server. Yay! But if I just run it locally and I can record it, go through kind of like I did here, but more focused because it's just on that data, that I'll probably be doing. But for like a full review, a full performance analysis, I don't know if I'd want to do that. Because, I mean, it took me about an hour to do that for this one, and I didn't get all that specific. I didn't even go through all of the stats here. It's like, we're only looking at this one. What the hell is this? This is telling you how much data was below, how much of the time was spent below 60 FPS. Now below 30 FPS. I mean, there's a lot more I could do here. And, yeah, I'm blathering. I know. I'm stopping. Goodbye. Hopefully there won't be a next time for this specific video. But hey, maybe it'll come up. You never know. See you then.